First question. Is breathing voluntary or involuntary?
Like everything else, it's unless it's both, you have a problem. Voluntary breathing is voluntary, involuntary breathing is involuntary. The breathing that keeps you alive all day, and especially during the night, is called involuntary because it doesn't require conscious attention.
I have to think about breathing. How do I let body do the breathing naturally?
Do you really have that problem, or do some people really have that?
Some people have that.
Oh, okay. Well, I, for example, had that on when Barbara's aeroplane went up to above 15,000 feet, like above. Once it went up to 4,000 meters without an oxygen tank, I had to actually think to breathe. But there's something misprogrammed if you have to actually think to breathe in a normal atmosphere. So if someone had that problem, I would need to ask them how they make that problem, and I know how to ask people how they have that problem if they do. You're probably referring to like sleep apnea, for example, where the person suddenly forgets to breathe even while asleep, and they suddenly wake themselves up with a start and take a breath, like the involuntary function wasn't going. And I would personally ask the person or teach them how to speak with their body so that it's allowed to do those functions on its own without conscious attention, because that's what the body is meant to do.
What's the correct way of breathing?
Well, there's no the correct way, because it depends on the function you're doing. If you're breathing in order to make an energetic, emotional or spiritual change, then there would be a method specific to that, and I'll outline the ones I use specifically for some courses during the process of this recording. However, the main error that most people make in breathing is breathing shallowly, like they're not breathing enough with the diaphragm, not filling the full amount of the lungs, which of course would be a reflection they're not fully participating in life and learning to breathe. So if they are participating in life coming into the body, they are likely to learn by extension to participate more into life. So any correct breathing for normal day-to-day application, there will be the diaphragm dropping first so that the air is brought into the lungs, and then fill the middle of the lungs, and then the top of the lungs, which is using the intercostal muscles third. People who are very nervous, frightened, not well participating in life, suffering from the effects of drugs, depressed, will be breathing more with the top of the lungs and not letting air come in deep. Conditions like asthma, where the person is struggling to breathe air in, they're panicking to breathe in, but that's because they didn't actually breathe out. Asthma is much more of a spasm where they didn't manage to breathe out, so they can't get enough air in. And then one exercise for asthma would be to use a towel to help squeeze the ribs to get more air out, and then take a breath in and learn to breathe out enough to breathe in. There will be changes in breathing if you're going to be running that will use additional muscles which are not part of normal day-to-day breathing use. Not that someone running usually needs to think about that, but the habit that most people have is shallow breathing, not moving the diaphragm much first, and they can never fill their lungs up enough and fully participate in life.
Is abdominal breathing the correct way of breathing?
Well, of course, that's just been covered. Abdominal, I presume you mean diaphragmic. The main amount of air that will enter the lungs is by the movement of the diaphragm. And if the person is mostly breathing by the intercostal muscles, that's costa means ribs and inter in between, so the muscles between the ribs are mostly filling the top part of the lungs, and so a person in a depressed posture like this is actually collapsing the ability of the diaphragm to move. So they will mostly be breathing with the intercostal muscles, with the ribs moving, and they'll be breathing shallow, and that will be reducing drastically their energy, and that will feed back into the depression. Then they'll think of more reasons why life is difficult, because their breathing is not letting them participate in life, and that will worsen the condition. So sit up straight with your shoulders back, as Jordan Peterson says, or as an elderly friend of mine in Copenhagen was told by his mother 75 years ago, if you slouch like the working class, you'll be paid like the working class. Take a posture, and part of that posture includes the possibility of the diaphragm moving and letting the air in.
Does my thoughts affect my breathing?
Yes, because everything affects everything. And while the people would like a linear answer, like that, the most popular self-help theory of the moment, where thoughts is central. I think of something, therefore I will attract it. People want their thinking to be so important. Well, no, thinking is just simply one aspect. However, if your thinking was negative or reversing time, then your breathing would actually match that pattern, your muscles would go into that pattern, your tone of voice would go into that pattern. Or if you used a negative tone of voice, that would affect your muscle posture, which would affect your breathing, which would affect could your spirit interact with your body. So actually the right place to enter is the place that you can enter. And there's not actually separate breathing, separate to your muscle posture, separate to your spiritual posture, separate to your thoughts, separate to the images you are making. You can choose to change any one of those, and it will change all of them. You can ask that as to more questions. If any of these lead to more questions, just ask them. Because maybe there's more information on any of them.
Does releasing one of the negative body postures with the deep breathing technique gets you more energy?
Well, it does, although that is the deep breathing technique, so that hasn't specified which one. So I could, if you wish, at this moment outline some of the essential breathing patterns as they exist in the purposes of the workshop trainings I have, because there's a few different approaches to breathing, not so many, but they haven't yet been described clearly anywhere. So one I've described hundreds of times but may not be written clearly is the ego hit breath that's used in the mirroring. So that is a sudden inspiration, like a short, sharp breath that hits the throat. So maybe that's step 2, because you can't suddenly have an inspiration without an expiration, or an inhalation without an exhalation. Just because inspiration can mean 2 things. So you would need to breathe out to suddenly breathe in. But then, so in the process of mirroring, you're reaching up to another dimension, another conceptual level in your mind. And once the air has gone out deeply, you will breathe in with a very sudden breath that hits the throat, and the throat being the center of communication. The fixed way of your ego and will suddenly be displaced, because the ego is your sense of who you are to sell and how you're going to sell yourself. Now, at the moment of mirroring, you're not selling yourself. You are totally honoring the other person who's right there in front of you. So